Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, this is a channel about Dungeons and Dragons where we're trying to take a darker tone with everything we do here. So if you like edgier kind of content, definitely hit that like and subscribe button. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters. We love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. What you do for us is amazing, and it definitely helps us out a lot here. And a big thank you to our good friends at Critical Failures. Check us out every Wednesday night as we go through Icewind Dale. With that out of the way, we're going to jump into this week's video, The Oath of Devotion Paladin. The Oath of Devotion Paladin comes to us from the Player's Handbook. This is like the perfect paladin. This is like the paladin from the Dungeons and Dragons movie, where you're just super good. You're always really thoughtful about your actions, and you do your best to take care of everyone. So naturally, it makes my skin crawl. That that being said, if you really wanted to hold up the ideals of what a traditional hero should be, this kind of really locks that in for you. The paladin being that very heroic themed kind of character with all the radiant damage and the healing abilities, and then the tenants actually fit that that heroic kind of goody-goody, where they're really all about aiding others, protecting the weak, and punishing those who threaten them. All of your abilities kind of have this anti-fiend and undead kind of feel to it. It's about being just and being that perfect hero. It fits really, really well. It's not super healy. It's not one of those kinds of changes, but it is a perfect kind of character that can be that really zealous hero. When you pick the subclass at 3rd level, you gain Channel Divinity. It does give you 2 options, which is pretty cool. The first one is Sacred Weapon. As an action, you can imbue one weapon that you are holding with positive energy. Using your Channel Divinity for 1 minute, you add your Charisma modifier to the attack rolls made with that weapon, with a minimum of +1. The weapon also emits bright light in a 20-foot radius and dim light 20 feet beyond that. If the weapon is not already magical, it becomes magical for the duration. You can end this effect on your turn as part of any other action. If you are no longer holding or carrying this weapon, or if you fall unconscious, this effect ends. Now, depending on how you do your stats would depict how early you get some of these really strong charisma bonuses. Usually that kind of tends to be a later thing if people tend to stick with Paladin all the way through their leveling experience, especially at higher levels. I happen to like some of the Paladin spells, so I usually tend to dip a lot into Charisma because I really like to make those saves a little harder to resist. But say you had a +5 to your Charisma, and you were using something like Great Weapon Master. That would greatly reduce the impact of that -5 to your attack roll, and still give you a pretty substantial leeway to hit with your attacks. And that would help that extra 10 damage kind of come in more often. Now, it depends on what you're trying to do. The benefit here, although you do not get an additional bonus to your attack damage, it ups your chances to hit pretty well. Even if you had a +2 or +3, that's added on to your regular attack modifier. So if you had a +1 weapon or whatever, you add all that on top of it. And one of the things that makes the Paladin great is even if you don't crit every time you hit, you can add smites in pretty regularly. So when it's time to fight a boss, one of the things you want to do is not miss, because that helps you go Nova, and you can dump all your spell slots into smites and do a huge amount of damage in a very short amount of time. This definitely helps you do that. The other channel Divinity ability you get is Turn the Unholy. As an action, you present your holy symbol and speak a prayer censoring fiends and undead. Using your Channel Divinity, each fiend or undead that can see or hear you within 30 feet of you must make a wisdom saving throw. If the creature fails its saving throw, it is turned for 1 minute or until it takes damage. A turned creature must spend its turns trying to move as far away from you as it can, and it can't willingly move to a space within 30 feet of you. It also can't take reactions. For its action, it can only use the dash action or try to escape from an effect that prevents it from moving. If there's nowhere to move, the creature can only use the dodge action. So here's the great thing. All undead are immune to fear, so this is your turn undead. But on top of that, it affects fiends. One of the other caveats is they don't need to see you if they can hear you. So if they're behind total cover or anything like that, they still need to make this saving throw. Restricting their availability as actions to only running or trying to break out of anything that might be entangling them or taking the dodge action is very beneficial. Now, when they take the dodge action, obviously you have disadvantage on attack rolls made against them. But what you don't have disadvantages on is things like cantrips and spells that have saving throws. So this is where you can kind of rely on your other team members to really put a dent into them, especially if you have them trapped in a corner or something. They can't move towards them. They're basically going to sit there and hit the dodge action. It's 1 minute or until it takes damage. So you can keep it locked away for a pretty substantial amount of time and then have them lay in that attack, so that way you kind of eat through a whole bunch of damage, which better ops your amount of damage you can do per turn, as opposed to just running in there and then trying to waste attacks on disadvantaged attack rolls against them. Really, you would kind of want to do that because it gives a good situation to take them off the board, and then you can just have all the other people that are spellcasters kind of double up and use their save their actions and use their cantrips as reactions, so they can all do it at the same time, so that way it's not like, oh, one of them attacked and then he was able to move. You want to add up all of it together because it reduces the amount of offensive attacks that go towards your direction. At 7th level, you gain Aura of Devotion. You and friendly creatures within 10 feet of you can't be charmed while you are conscious, and at 18th level, this range of this aura increases to 30 feet. This is something that's going to be very rarely used. I'll be honest with you, you're probably going to forget you have it. And the main reason being, I don't know a lot of circumstances where charmed is the benefit or the most optimal choice for a DM to use. Maybe in a heavy role-playing scenario, or if you're doing something in the Feywild, then I can see a lot more charmed spells and circumstances or spells that do that. Working in the same kind of capacity and being useful, or even seen regularly. There are some spells that do give you the charmed effect, or it's a charm that does something different, which are probably a little bit more common, but most of the time you really won't even see this. It's not even going to be on your radar. So this, I'll be honest, you can totally forget about it. It's a shame, but it's just not something that's as useful as it can really be. But at 15th level, you gain Purity of Spirit. You are always under the effects of protection from evil and good spell. Now, this spell, although it's a 1st level spell, it does actually do a lot. Until the spell ends, one willing creature you touch is protected against certain types of creatures, aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, and undead. The protection grants several benefits. Creatures of those types have disadvantage on attack rolls against their target. The target also can't be charmed, frightened, or possessed by them. If the target is already charmed, frightened, or possessed by such a creature, the target has advantage on any saving throw against the relevant effect. Being a character that wears heavy armor, your AC gets up really quickly. Having undead and fiends alone have disadvantage on attack rolls against you is a very powerful thing. Undead and fiends make up such a huge portion of the monster manual. Aberrations kind of sneak their way in as well. Very rarely will you fight celestials, but elementals, they can pop up from time to time as well. That is a big portion of enemies that have disadvantage on attack rolls on a high AC character. You are in a great opportunity in campaigns where you're dealing with the 9 hells. Say you were in the Shadowfell or anything like that. This makes you have the biggest defensive buff you can have. It's such a good spell to have as a permanent cast on you. Casting it regularly, it would really depend on the circumstance that you're in. It's really It's more of a cleric and paladin kind of a spell. Really kind of fits with them mostly, in my opinion. But I don't think a lot of paladins would be casting this spell. But that is a big defensive benefit for an already tanky kind of a character. The final ability for the Oath of Devotion Paladin is Holy Nimbus. At 20th level, as an action, you can emanate an aura of sunlight for 1 minute. The bright light shines from you in a 30-foot radius, and dim light shines 30 feet beyond that. Whenever an enemy creature starts its turn in bright light, the creature takes 10 radiant damage. In addition, for the duration, you have advantage on saving throws against spells cast by fiends or undead. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. So that's, for 1 minute is 10 turns in combat. So surviving 10 turns in combat, you will deal 10 radiant damage to anything within 30 feet. That's a great amount of additional damage, because 100 damage is a lot, especially in D&D. 100 damage is a lot. It's also added on to any additional damage you deal, so you can very easily get a pretty good damage per round average up if you use this and then use your channel divinity to help regulate your attacks so you very rarely miss. That can bump you up a lot. That can really help you go Nova and dish out a huge amount of damage. And it helps because paladins don't have a lot of AoE attacks. They're not really built for taking on multiple enemies and hitting them all at the same time. This helps to do that. And considering radiant damage and how it's so good against undead and fiends, and you kind of want to have it as a damage type because it's very reliable, it's pretty good. It's not a huge amount of damage, so it's not like you're dealing like 40 damage per round alone, but you can definitely hit that with just the 10 radiant damage going every turn, because if you hit multiple enemies, you'll do that. But your average damage as a 20th level character, having an additional 10 every turn is helpful. Plus, you also have advantage on spells cast by any of those fiends or undeads in that area. That you have advantage on. They have disadvantage on hitting you, so they can't. It's really difficult for them to hit you with anything, so your longevity is pretty heightened. And at 20th level, that can be a big deal, because 20th level combat is kind of all over the place. It's fun. You get to use a lot of cool stuff, but you take a huge amount of damage in a very short amount of time. And it's very hard to kind of manage that and regulate that. So it tends to be very difficult. But if you could survive 10 rounds, an extra 100 radiant damage by the end of it is pretty impressive, especially considering how big of an AoE 30 feet is. The Oath of Devotion Paladin really is the paladin from Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Amongst Thieves. It's just, it fits. You're so good. You're so nice. You kind of like exemplify justice and honor and seeing the good in people and wanting to do good. It's very reflective of that kind of a character. He's the perfect model for this type of character. Now, it's hard to follow these tenets and kind of take them in an evil direction. So I really would just stay away from it and try and be like maybe a Vengeance Paladin and kind of fit that in, or Conquest Paladin, work that way. Because you can't take those kinds of actions and be so selfish, because you break these tenets, and that's how you become an Oathbreaker. It's a great way to become an Oathbreaker. Be the Devotion Paladin and then lose your faith and become the Oathbreaker is a great story. We all love it. We've seen it a million times, but it still feels so good to see that happen. That being said, we're going to bring this video to a close. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, definitely hit that like and subscribe button. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters. We love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And check us out Wednesdays at Critical Failures. The link to both of those is in the description. And thank you for giving a spooky kid a chance.